Does anyone know if it's supposed to turn green or is red? Okay. So, well, thank you very much for coming here. It's really awesome to see this many people coming for a data visualization discussion. It's my first Drupal conference presentation, so I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm excited to share with you the charts module. So just to give an introduction to myself, I'm Daniel Cothran, and you may know me online as Untitled. I work at a public health company called John Snow Incorporated, or JSI, and we've been around for over 40 years and have implemented public health projects in over 100 different countries. I started with JSI coming out of public health school, and I fully intended to do public health, and now I'm leading a team of Drupal developers and building and maintaining Drupal sites. If I had to fit myself into a Drupal archetype, I would probably say I am a site builder. However, since around 2016, I've started creating or taking over the maintenance of some modules. Charts is definitely one of my favorites, as it ties in neatly with some of the work that I do at JSI. For example, just yesterday, I launched a website in DC that relies heavily on the charts module. I'm not a seasoned or particularly adept programmer. Programming jargon is still somewhat of a foreign language to me, but through my tenacity and commitment to Drupal, I think I've done a lot to add value to the community, and I asked for a lot of help, and I wanted to give a shout out to a couple of my colleagues and mentors, Michael Mwebaze and Elias Maluni, who both sort of set me down the path to figuring out how to port the charts module to Drupal 8. So here's the site I launched yesterday. So you can see we have a number of different visualizations going on there. So the outline of my presentation is I'm going to be talking about when you might want to chart. We'll give an introduction to the charts module, then talk about how to use it sort of from the user interface. And then I'll step into the code and discuss the code for a little bit, and then if there aren't too many questions during the FAQ, then we can try to do some small demo. So let's start off by talking about how data visualization can add value to a Drupal website. So here's an example that's pretty close to home. The project pages on Drupal.org have these visualizations that show the number of downloads and which version. This is the one for charts. Beyond module maintainers, these visualizations are useful to Dries as he's writing his Dries note. They're also fodder for Twitter trolls trying to say, oh, Drupal's not getting enough traction or whatever else. But in general, these types of visualizations are great for e-commerce sites, for marketers, for user interface designers, and a number of other groups of people that I'm just not thinking about now. Charts are also great for adding value to content. So I used to work at a medical lab, and every week we would have a journal club. And rather than going through long passages of text, we tended to just focus on the graphs that were included in the articles and discuss those. Charts are also great for concise communication. This pie chart provides a lot of facts about the world without having an enormous run-on sentence, and it's also eye-catching. In addition to providing facts, data visualizations can be great for putting facts in context. And charts may influence the behavior of your website users. So including a chart like this could increase your users' trust in your organization and potentially make them more likely to donate to your nonprofit. I showed you images from news organizations, online publications, nonprofits. I could have shown you images from government websites or educational institutions. These types of organizations are all known Drupal users, and I think if they want first-class content management from Drupal, but why not also best-of-class data visualization in Drupal without having to, go to too many third-party sources? So I believe if Drupal can, incorporate views in core and, manipulate data with views, it should also be able to chart it. And I'm definitely not the first person to have that thought, because 11 years ago, the charts module went up on Drupal.org. To my knowledge, it was posted by QuickSketch. Currently, around 20,000 sites report using the charts module, although most of them are still Drupal 7. Around 2,500 are using the Drupal 8 version. It's been getting pretty good traction, and although it's a port, it's grown some in scope. So originally there were 2 charting providers that you could use with the charts module. I've included 3 more since I ported the module. And depending on if we do the demo or not, we could even incorporate a 4th one. A 4th new one. The original libraries were, I already said that. These are the libraries that are currently in the Drupal 8 module. They're all great libraries that have good documentation, pretty strong online communities. Some are more active than other. C3 I've included here, but I feel like Billboard.js which is a branch, or what's the right word? They split off of C3, and I think they've sort of modernized it a little bit. And so if anyone was asking me between those 2, I would probably direct them at Billboard.js. There's more than one way to use the charts module. In my head, I kind of categorize it in 2 different ways. So I think charts really excels at plotting data from an existing database, whether or not that's your Drupal database or some external database that just holds data. Quick side note, if you're connecting to external databases, I recommend the Views Database Connector. That's another module I'm maintaining. You may also want to be adding charts sort of at the time of content creation, and I'm thinking especially like if you're using the layout builder and creating a long page, and you want to have a nice little chart. You could use the settings tray and add a block and use the charts block to incorporate a visualization there. So let's talk about installing and using charts. A quick note is that charts doesn't work without a submodule enabled. The submodules make the necessary JavaScript libraries available, and getting those actual JavaScript files into your Drupal site is probably the biggest barrier to using charts. It doesn't really seem that there's a consensus among the community about the best way to install JavaScript libraries. I mean, we've pretty much all settled on Composer for PHP libraries. JavaScript, it still seems like it's up in the air. In the charts module, in the submodule readme.txt files, we include, I think, very detailed step-by-step instructions for being able to use Composer to incorporate JavaScript libraries into your site, which you may have strong feelings about. If you're not a command line person, but you're comfortable enough installing modules, you can use the library manager module and manually add the necessary libraries. So after you enable the module, then go to the configure settings, and you'll set up the default chart configurations. What this does is, especially if you're using views to create your charts, it just starts you out with a number of different settings. For example, if you want to have data markers enabled by default, or you want to pick a particular library, you could install multiple submodules like HighCharts, Google, etc. But if you want HighCharts to be the first option when someone's creating a new chart, then you can set that on this page. I'm in the process of making it so a little bit like the appearance page on So like you can have your global theme settings, or you can have per theme settings. So once you've set those defaults, the next thing to do is create a view. And when you're creating your view, set the view settings to, well, you don't have to do content, but make sure that you use the display format of chart and that you're charting fields. The first thing you'll need to do after you have created this view is to add a field that contains some sort of numeric data, or you can apply aggregation to get a number. And then click on the format settings link, and it'll open up a window like you see. And then there's where you can set per chart settings about data markers and what you want to use as your data field and the chart title and all those types of things. And when you click apply, then you should see the chart in your preview just like that. So what about if you want a combo chart, meaning a chart that has more than one chart type? To do that, you simply add a chart attachment display. And then you configure that. It's pretty much the same as configuring the parent display. And then you attach it to the parent. And then there are a couple other settings in the middle of the view where you can say, I want a secondary y-axis or inherent contextual filters and things like that. There are some gotchas that can occur with the chart attachment, and so if anyone out there is a documentation contributor, it'd be great to have some support with that. Okay, so that's a pretty quick rundown of using the charts module through the user interface. There weren't a lot of screens because it is actually pretty easy to do. I'm going to go through how the module works sort of on the back end, and I hope that it makes the module a little bit less daunting and maybe spurs some ideas. So in general, the charts module can be broken into core and submodules. Many of the submodules are charting providers, and you can easily create your own charting provider that without having to touch the code of charts core. It doesn't need to live in the charts module either. There's also an example module to demonstrate how the API works, and a charts override example module in the starter kits directory. In the next few slides, I'm going to talk about the source directory. Okay, so the first directory is annotation, and we use annotation basically to avoid info hooks. They basically allow you to include metadata in your plugin without having to have those hooks. The next is the form directory, and this allows you to, this is that charts default settings form that you saw in the earlier slide. It's what creates that form. The plugin folder is a very important one. The first folder, chart, you probably don't really need to look at unless you're wanting to score some easy commits and get your free PHP Storm license. The style in the views plugins, there's 3 of them. One is style, that's kind of the main one. It does a lot of the data transformation and rendering, and that's also sort of the form that you see when you're clicking on format settings in your view. The display plugin creates the chart attachment, which I mentioned a second ago. And then the field plugin is a recent development, and it creates a views field called a scatter field that allows you to select it as your data field, and then it gives you coordinates from 2 other fields in your view. The third directory under plugins is the override, and Plugins it's great because with object-oriented programming, you can extend classes, but that means that you might also need to create a custom style plugin, and it gets to be a lot of programming, and you'll start to feel like maybe I should have just created my own custom module. Why am I using the charts module? But we did want to give people options for some customizations without having to extend the class. And so what you can do is, in the starter kits, there's a module called Charts Overrides, and you can just put that into your custom folder and then basically change the options that you want based on that charting provider's API. And then that gets fed into the primary plugin for your charting provider. I think that'll make a little bit more sense later on. The services directory, we use a few services to make the module more pluggable. There's a lot of code in these services. There's not a lot of code, so I'm just going to move on. The settings directory has some code to pay attention to. The charts base setting form basically contains all of the form elements that you'll see when you're configuring a chart, whether that's in views or in charts blocks or on the default settings form. Then there's the charts default colors. This is primarily for getting colors to use in various places in the module. The charts default settings just has a few basic settings set up so that it just sort of has sensible defaults basically. And then the charts type class sort of explains different chart types like bar versus column and whether or not it has a single or double axis. There's very little going on in the theme directory. It provides an interface for defining charts constants, and there are just two which are related to single or double axes. The utility directory is one of the more important directories in the module, even if it only contains one file. It handles much of the data manipulation, and in the next few slides I'll go through these methods. So the views data method transforms the views results into an array of arrays. You're probably familiar with that if you work in Drupal. Within the inner array are objects that contain some of the more important information for charting libraries like type and color and value. The remove unselected fields method takes out fields that are not selected by your view as in the data sort of field set, and it ensures that the for loops performed later on iterate over the appropriate number of times. And then the create charts data method takes that array that you saw a second ago and then it transforms it into this one, which is sort of broken into what you'll see in the charts lingo as the categories array and the series data array. And then lastly, the check missing library method looks to see if you've properly installed the JavaScript libraries for your module, and it alerts users that they may need to install a charting library if they're at a view and they're not seeing anything. So the charts module file has a few different hooks. There's hook views data to identify the scatter field and set up the data structure for that. There's hook theme, which doesn't really do a lot other than sort of points you in the direction of the correct template file. And then there's template preprocess hook, which is used for generating charts through views. It does a lot of heavy work of combining your parent chart and your chart attachments and bringing them all together, and it sends the data over to the utility file to be processed by those methods. So that brings us to the submodules. There's one major file in each of the charting provider submodules, and that's at source plugin chart, and then the charting provider's name.php. And this file makes use of the classes within the settings directory, which you can see settings, like in this example, chart.js, and then a number of different classes in there. What it does is it creates a JSON object that is attached to the HTML element, and then it's attached as a data attribute, and then that data attribute is fed to the JavaScript from the charting provider, and your chart's rendered. So ideally in that settings directory, you'll have a lot of classes, and they'll match up with the corresponding libraries API. So in this example, text, it goes over to text, Y matches with Y, vertical align matches. It's a lot. I mean, if you've gone to HighChart's API, for example, it's enormous, and it's a lot of work to include all of this. So I would definitely appreciate any help just making the module stronger. So speaking of which, the areas where I would really appreciate people's help are making it easy for anyone to install charting libraries. So even if there's not great consensus on the best way to do that, I would appreciate other ideas. Having a better user interface for charts blocks, which currently it asks you to just enter in your data like separated by a comma in a text area field. So it's not super intuitive. One thing I'd really like are dynamic options when you're like in the views settings form, for example, and you select one particular library. If there are additional like settings that, like, for example, C3 doesn't have 3D charts, so you wouldn't need to see a checkbox that says like make this chart 3D. But for HighCharts, you can do that, so that would be a useful form element to have. Writing tests is always appreciated, and then manual testing and feedback, and as always, documentation is really important. So that's sort of the first part of my presentation, and I'd love to go ahead and answer any questions that you have.
I want to see the examples.
Yeah, you can definitely do that.
Is this integrated with just like the JSON API? So how would you get to this if you use that? Is it like a tab or something?
I haven't integrated it with JSON API, and I honestly don't really know how to do that. So if you have a decoupled site, I assume you would sort of use the API, but I don't know sort of what your next step would be. Like I said, I'm a site builder, and all of my sites are sort of traditional Drupal sites that are coupled.
What's the best contact point for helping with contribution?
It would me.
Just hunt you down?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can reach out to me through like the Drupal contact form. Find me. I'm on Twitter as Dan4QOL, or just create an issue in the issue queue. But yeah, I'm the only Drupal 8 maintainer for charts. So, and I'm like, after this presentation, I'm happy to sit with you or whatever.
Now, I was just curious as how it pulls the data. Can you do like custom queries? Because I was almost thinking, like if you set this onto an e-commerce site and sit there and pull charts of products,
Mm-hmm.
what's selling the best, what's not selling the best, that kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you pull how do like a query statement and plug it into the charts?
The way I would do it is just with views.
It's views, okay.
Yeah. So I pretty much only the charts API example has a controller, but the only times I've used the module really are for using views.
Okay.
Views is so powerful for that kind of thing, and it enables a lot of like other classes of users to create visualizations. So yeah, I think that's probably how I would approach it. Any other questions? How many people have used the Drupal 8 version of charts?
Not yet.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll go to those later. How many people are sort of PHP programmers? Okay, so pretty significant amount. Let me start off with just doing the user interface. Okay. Move around so I can see this better. So I have a charts demo content site set up, and find my mouse. Okay. So I'm going to create a new chart. Go to views. I've already enabled the charts module, and I've enabled some of the submodules as well. So I'm going to add a view. Just going to skip that for now. So I have a couple content types that have data fields attached to them. I'm going to choose award because it's a little bit more interesting. And I'll create a page with chart as the display format, showing, so I mentioned fields. We can just start with 10. Not the fastest computer, but okay, so I have the title already in the fields, and I'm going to add value, which I know is a field on this content type. I'm going to have it as unformatted because sometimes commas can mess up. Like the libraries want to see a number, not a string with a comma. So I'm going to use unformatted. And then, so here's the important part, the settings. This is what the style plugin creates. And so I'll start out with a column. For a charting library, I'm going to start out with high charts. And then we have title, and here's the section where you do your which field provides data. So I'm going to select this. Sorry, it's a little hard for me to see. And then, where's my mouse? Blue. So let's enable tooltips. Put the legend position at the bottom. something like that. So voila, you have your chart. So I mentioned if you want a combo chart, you can do that by adding a chart attachment. So all right. So it's complaining at least one data field must be selected. I'm going to add a different data field so that it makes sense. And I'm going to do that through a relationship. So I know that this content type award has a taxonomy field for location, and the location taxonomy has a field for population. So I'm going to and let me add that population field. So now let's go to the settings, and instead of a column, I'd like this to be a line, and add it here. Green's fine for me. When you have a chart attachment, you don't really need to configure these because these all get inherited by the settings on the parent display. So you can pretty much just ignore this for a chart attachment. Okay, so you can see there's a line graph here now. And that's just showing what you get in the chart attachment. But now if you come to the page, oh, sorry, I forgot. So this was what I was mentioning. There's a few chart settings you need to apply. So I'm going to say attach onto the page display. And then this is a bug I haven't fixed yet, but I want to keep it here, but I just need to click apply. Okay, so now I'm going to the page.
Excuse me, when you first started the chart attachment view, what display form did you use? Was chart attachment a page, a view type? A display type?
Chart attachment is a display type, and the style plugin is set to chart automatically.
Okay.
So you still have to configure the settings for it, but it, yeah. Okay, so now you can see you have your combo chart. And you can, use contextual filters, you can use exposed filters, so any of, those typical things you would do with views, you can do with charts. The other thing that you can do, and I hope it works, is, for example, let's do C3. Yeah, so now you have a C3 chart with only that one change. And you could do that for any of them. Any questions there?
Is the chart attachment now also using C3?
No. But because pretty much all the settings except for the label field and data field are inherited, it doesn't really matter what you put here.
Could you override them?
For something like that, I mean, you can only have one chart type for a chart, so that you wouldn't really want to override. You can have multiple different charting providers on the same page. So you could do one view as a block on a page, and then you could do another view as a block and put them on the same page. One could be high charts, one could be C3. The other thing I could show you is, I'll show you how the charts blocks look. I'm really not very happy with them, but there's a time and place for them, and there's some level of functionality there. Okay, so I have two that I've already set up. So with these, if you want to add one, what you do is just click place block and then select charts block. And you get that same form pretty much as you had for views. There's a few modifications. So I'll do a column again, I'll do high charts again. I'm going to do a single series. I'm going to okay. And then you have the normal sort of chart form here at the bottom. So So these are the other two that I added to this page. So I'm not sure if I did something wrong. Maybe I was. Did I not do the slash?
Put a comma in between category and C at the end.
Oh, okay. I should have given this one a better name.
would have been pulling data from a different database, would that box that you put the data in have changed? Or is that something that you'd have to code?
Yeah, so the charts blocks doesn't have a good way of incorporating data from another database. In that case, I can show you. Let me just try to get this working real quick. And then
I think also the page path was incorrect.
That's, yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So there's the new one. Let me go back to views real quick. So I've also enabled Views Database Connector on this site, and with that, it actually allows you to use tables from an external database. So, like, I know that this one has data that I could plot, and you add them as fields. It's pretty much the same as a content type. Okay, so maybe I can show you all code, since there were a number of PHP programmers. So I wanted to demonstrate how easy it is to add another charting provider. So if you're not happy with HighCharts or Google Charts, C3, etc., you can add your own. And I was talking to someone recently, and they mentioned Vega Lite. Do any of you know that charting library? No hands? No one? Okay. Sorry, it's not moving over. Okay, I think I need to mirror. Okay, so what I did is, or maybe let me show you. So this is Vega Lite. Has a ton of different options. Actually, probably more than most of the others I've seen. And I've never worked with it before yesterday. What I did was I went to the charts modules and I copied charts_charts.js, and I just pasted it into my custom folder, and then I just went through and I just renamed anytime chart.js showed up, I replaced it with Vega Lite. So here's everything that's there. So with libraries, all I did was I cheated a little bit because I'm using remote libraries where mostly with charts you'll use local ones. So I didn't really do much other than just add these here. And then so for the settings, I just added a few that I knew were necessary. Legalite, and then it was pretty much all working here and here. So I have a chart type, build chart type method that you can use if the names that we have as like the default chart types, like bar and everything, don't exactly match up with, like Google, for example, wants you to have it has like a camel case name for every one of the. So you could change that in something like this, and then the build variables. This is sort of the primary method that's used within these. And so all I've done is I've created a new Vegalite chart object, and then I've done a little bit of data manipulation because it requires. Let me see if I can pull that up. Okay, it requires the data object to look like this, which is not the way that we've set it up in that data array that I showed you earlier on in the presentation. So I had to do some manipulation to have within data have values, and then have like the A matches up with the X axis, and B matches up with the Y axis, and then you also have to have this encoding. So that's what I some of those things I set up here, like the encoding I set up here. I did a little bit of manipulation, and I didn't do the manipulation properly because, as I mentioned, I launched a site yesterday. All I did was I enabled that module, cleared caches to bring in the libraries. Vegalite showed up, I selected it, and then when I save my chart, I have a Vegalite graph. Someone who knows the Vegalite API would be able to create this in probably like an hour or 30 minutes. Like it took me a very short amount of time. It was all basically manually going and renaming, from Chart.js to Vegalite, and that was like probably 70% of what I had to do, and then a little bit of changing the JSON object structure. So I think that's it, unless anyone else has questions.
So if you want to make sure I understand, if you want to use a different library, you have to duplicate the module. You don't add it inside of the charts module. You would duplicate the module, and then you're not putting it into the charts module at all. You're just
because of the way charts was built with sort of a core and submodule setups like Drupal itself. The core module can identify charts plugins that are in other modules and then make a use of them. So so that's nice, because if you just want to use maybe you have your own custom visualization library or something like that, you can just use that, and you can use it in your custom module. You don't have to worry about making it so neat and contributing it back to the charts module.
And that means that if you update the charts module, you won't use that library.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, so that's definitely a best practice.
What's your favorite charting library?
Probably high charts. And one of the reasons for that, let me go to the site I launched. One of the reasons for that, so here's an example of the scatter plot, is it gives you this little hamburger menu, and you can download as a image if you want to like save it into a Word document or something, which is awesome. You can also, sorry, it got really small. You can view data table, and so it gives the data table, and that's as far as I've heard is much better for accessibility than yeah. So that's probably my favorite. The problem is it's proprietary, so you either have to pay a licensing fee, or if you're a nonprofit, you can potentially be exempt from that.
Nonprofit or education.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, I think that's it then. I really appreciate your time.